Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Grant Cameron. And Grant's been on the show before. It's always wonderful to have him on. And Grant became involved in UFOlogy in 1975 with personal sightings of an object which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. The sightings occurred in Carman, Manitoba. In the past few years, Cameron has turned his research interests to the involvement and actions of the President of the United States in the UFO problem. He has made 20-plus trips to the National Archives and most of the various presidential archives looking for presidential UFO material. His website is presidentialufo.com. He's also a presenter at the Citizen Hearing, April 29th to May 3rd, 2013, National Press Club in Washington, D.C., in which he spoke of the UFO psychic connection. His books are available on Amazon.com, one of which is UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informants, a report on involvement in UFO crash retrievals, and co-authored with T. Scott Crane. And it was with great pleasure that we welcome Grant to the show this evening. Hi, Grant.
How you doing, Solaris? Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate being on your show because you're one of the people who's aware of what's going on.
Oh, bless your heart. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on. And, of course, we'll try to keep up with each other tonight, right?
Yes, we will.
It's great to have you on. So what have you been doing? What have you been up to?
I've been down the rabbit hole a little bit farther than ever before and doing a lot of the consciousness stuff. And the consciousness stuff sort of led me into the alien rock and roll connection, which we'll talk about a little bit. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I've sort of gotten into is the book that I did, UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informants. The premise of the book is that the U.S. government has been indirectly leaking material inside the UFO community. They do it by taking real material, putting a bunch of disinformation around it, like the idea of MJ12, and then putting it out, and of course burning a bunch of researchers who release it, and people say, well, it's a hoax, which it is. I mean, it's phony documents and stuff like that, and they sort of indirectly get the idea that they've got a live alien, Area 51, MJ12, the fact that they've got the telepathy technology, stuff like that. They're sort of indirectly letting people know. But what I've gotten into lately that I've lectured on a couple times is the whole idea about the aliens are doing the same thing. I'm absolutely sure. And I've had a number of conversations. One person sort of got me into this realm, the whole consciousness realm, and then this idea about the aliens sort of leading us along was Colin Andrews, who's the famous guy for crop circles.
Right.
And as you may know, he had his consciousness connection, and then came public that he believed he'd been abducted. And when he and I talk about it, we talk about the chessboard. That whoever's behind the phenomena, we believe it's some sort of non-local, alien, interdimensional, whatever, is basically leading the path and moving us around like pieces on a chessboard. Mm-hmm. And there's so many examples of this happening, and that's one of the things I've really sort of gotten into is I sort of go back through the history of ufology, and I basically say I've been in this long enough to know that this phenomenon is changing constantly. It's not the same thing it was when I started back in 1975. When I started, and I keep telling people, you've got to believe me on this, that all it was a couple of sightings. People would have sightings, and there would be a lot of landing trace cases where something would land in a field that would leave burn marks, tripod marks, and stuff like that. And nowadays, those things don't happen. There are no landing traces anymore. This doesn't happen anymore. It was very, very common when I started. And the whole idea that when I started, it was all flying saucers, and now it's all triangles. It's moved to triangles. And the fact that when I started, there was only a couple of reported abductions. There was Betty and Barney Hill. There was a case, a Shermer case, a police officer in 1967 in Nebraska. There was the Pascagoula case in 1973. Then there was Travis Walton, which just sort of started a snowball. But that was not when I got involved. When the same year Travis Walton was abducted, I had my experience. And now, I mean, everybody's getting abducted. Everybody's having downloads. Everybody's doing all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But in the days when I started, this was totally unknown. You would be totally written off as a Looney Tune if you ever talked about a download or about the fact that people were being abducted or that people were getting messages and that mental phenomena was part of this whole thing. It's a completely different world. So what I look at and what I can sort of show in a lecture is that the aliens are basically running the show. They're putting this stuff out. They're indirectly detailing what they're doing, and they actually first gave the hint. One of the stories I bring up is Shermer, who was this guy in 1967, claimed to have been abducted, and during his regression, he said he was talking to the aliens, and they said, "We want you to believe in us, but just a little bit." And that's the way I think it works, whether it's the government or whether it's the aliens, is that nobody is going to absolutely stand up and say, here's disclosure, here's how the game is played. The aliens are not going to land on the White House lawn and describe what they're doing, but everybody's leading us along with these breadcrumbs, and they're just slowly sort of acclimatizing us to what's going on. And I think at this point, I'm very confident, because what happened to me in 1975 is I had my sightings, and I tried to publish a book, which is actually now about to be published out of Canada by a publisher. And I tried to get the book published. Nobody would publish the book. The local publisher in the big city where I live, and this was right near this big flap area where there was UFOs every day for a year. They knew this story. It was a big story here. And the local publisher said, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers." And it was at that point I said, "Oh, it's a total waste of time." I gave the manuscript to my sister, who held the manuscript for about 20 years. I didn't even know where the manuscript was, and just sort of gave up and said, sightings is a total waste of time. This is all I want to do is I want to find out what was it that I saw, because I had some pretty close-up encounters. I didn't have any like little satellite-type lights in the sky. My stuff was up close. In fact, the one, I always tell the story, I was going to jump on it. I was that close to this object.
Wow.
And so all I was interested in is somebody in the world has to know what it was that I saw. So I started this sort of chase after the Canadian government, and then I chased the former president of Penn State University. Then I chased the president of the United States. Then I chased these high-level intelligence officials like Ronald Pandolfi, the head scientist for the CIA, trying to figure out that somebody in this group of people has to know what it was that I saw in 1975. But I would say if I were to die tomorrow, I think I would be fairly assured that I found the answer. I think right now, whether it's myself or whether it's people in the field, I think we really are starting to understand what's going on. We understand especially the consciousness connection, the fact that this is not necessarily strictly a physical phenomena. In fact, when I lecture now, I say the minute you bring up physical phenomena and you start talking about measuring weight and stuff, you're totally wrong. You're off on the wrong track. You're down the wrong road. That we're starting to understand how reality works, that it's not when you get into quantum physics, which when I started, I mean, nobody would even, if you talked about quantum physics inside a UFO lecture, nobody would even know what you're talking about. But I think a lot of people in the UFO community now have heard about consciousness. They've heard about quantum physics. They've heard about the fact that the physical world is all space. It's not a physical world. That you have the quantum wave potentials. That a particle is a wave and a particle, and that when you get consciousness acting on the breaking down this wave potential, which is the basis of all reality, then it forms a particle, which means consciousness is primary to the universe. I mean, some of these things we talk about now, I think in the UFO community, people know what you're talking about. They know that consciousness is connected. And when I started, it was strictly lights in the sky, hard material. It was like, what is this thing made out of? What kind of metal is it? Where are these aliens from? Let's measure these crop circles or these imprints and try to figure out what kind of chemicals are on there so we can figure out what kind of propulsion system they're using. That stuff, I think, has sort of all been dropped. Everybody's sort of, we're not going to play with this anymore. And everybody's getting into sort of the aspect of the mind. And the other thing that I found, and your story sort of details this as well, is in ufology, we still sort of play the game because in ufology, as you know, when you talk about this kind of stuff, people think you're kind of weird. Not as much as when I started. When I first started, it was really bad. Now you still sort of will get some flack from certain communities. So what happens in the UFO community is a lot of researchers still want to play this stupid game. I'm an open-minded skeptic. And I say, no, you're not. You're stupid. There is no such thing as an open-minded skeptic any more than there's somebody who's a little bit pregnant. You're either a skeptic or you're gullible, or you're going to look at the facts. So it's this idea that we want to play both sides of the fence. So we sort of say, we really don't know what's going on. The government doesn't know what's going on. This is a big, huge mystery. Send us more money. We need some more research and stuff like that. And people are still playing this game that we really don't know what's going on. And I'm saying, yes, we do know what's going on. We have a fairly good concept. And to play that role is to play the sort of the thing that you want to appease the scientific community. You want to say, well, I'm really not buying into what people are saying about what's going on. I'm more skeptical. I'm more scientific. And I'm saying it's a big mystery. And therefore, it sort of stops the scientists from laughing at them. And to me, it's like if it's call a spade a spade. If you believe this is what's going on, stand on that. Develop the theory. You may not be right, but you develop the theory, you develop the idea, which leads to the next idea, which leads to the next idea. And to me, that's how science advances, is by taking ideas, finding out what's wrong with it, and moving on, instead of keep going back to square one and saying, we don't know what's going on. The government doesn't know what's going on. This is all a big mystery. And I say, basically, when it comes right down to it, this kind of stuff is like the definition of insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again for 70 years and believing you're going to come to a different conclusion. You have to get off that square. You've got to develop a theory, and you've got to start moving along. And even now, there are groups. And the one group that I was talking to you about pre-show was this group, which is called FREE, this for experiencers. And it has people on the board like Dr. Edgar Mitchell from the Apollo program, Man Walk on the Moon. It has Rudy Shield from Harvard University, and just a stellar board of people who are working on the problem of consciousness. They realize that this is part of it. Experiencers, people who believe that they've had some interaction with this phenomena, people who are talking about telepathy. If you look at their home page, one of the tabs on the home page, there's only about 6 tabs. One of the tabs is consciousness, and it's this whole mind thing. And I've told numerous times, and I think I probably told it on your lecture before, that from the word go, the government has known what's going on. They play the little game. They don't know what's going on. But it goes back to when I had this download that occurred in 2012. One of the things that I had in the download was a top secret Canadian government document from November of 1950. So this is almost square one. This is almost at the very beginning. And what this document is, it's a document where the Canadian government believes that that the flying saucer phenomena will offer them a potential energy system. So what they do is they go down and through the military attaché, the Canadian military attaché, to the Defense Department in Washington. They go down and through the Canadian Embassy, the military attaché starts asking a bunch of questions. What's the deal with flying saucers? Is this for real? And the material, they gather all this material at a classified level. They come back, they write this top secret memo. And in the top secret memo, the Canadians are reporting on what American officials, not people on the street, they could describe them as American officials, the people who are running the program, tell them flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who are trying to find out the modus operandi of these objects, and that the subject is of tremendous significance to the Americans. Then they say, and we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. So in 1950, November 1950, the Canadians were told by American officials that mental phenomena was part of the phenomena, and it was part of this whole flying saucer, and it was all for real, and they were working on it, and they were going to exchange credentials with the Canadians to work on this whole thing. So when people say they really know what's going on, I say, no, the government's known from square one. And you've had this interaction with them working on the technology, this telepathy technology, and that's what it's all about. When it comes down to the military, they really, they may care where these people are from or what's going on, but mostly it comes down to, do you want to give this technology to ISIS? Do you want to give it to the Russians? Do you want to give it to the Chinese? Or do we want to dominate? Because the Americans got caught once. In 1957, the Americans got caught with Sputnik. It was sort of like they didn't really take it seriously. And suddenly Sputnik was up and the Russians were ahead. And it was a tremendous embarrassment to the United States that the Russians, this communist state that they were putting down as being very backwards, suddenly had somebody in space. They had something in space, and the Americans hadn't launched anything. So it was a great embarrassment. And it was at that point that they developed NASA. And it was at that point when they developed DARPA. And it was formerly called ARPA, and then it became DARPA. And that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And that's the whole idea that in order to be ahead in the world militarily, the best way not to get caught off guard is to be ahead of the pack. So any type of a technology, anything that has a potential to develop a technology for weapons or whatever, they're on it. They don't really care whether it's a stupid idea or whatever. If there's a chance for technology, and that's what it's all about. So when it comes to the crafts, when it comes to the telepathy, and that's what I say. If you're in 1947, the reason I say that the Canadians were told by the Americans knew, how would they know? Because in 1950, there was no contactees. There was no George Adamski. He wouldn't appear till 2 years later. There was no Fry. There was none of these contactees. And there was no abductees. The first abductee story would not be told till Betty and Barney Hill's book in 1966. So there was nobody in 1950 running around saying, we're talking to aliens and they're telepathic. So how did the Americans know that it was mental phenomena? Because the main story now, if you listen to people like the people who do the Roswell research, is the predominant story now is that there was one alien at the Roswell crash that was alive. So if you're going to go pick up the craft in Roswell, you come up against this alien, and the alien's talking in your head. And if you're from the military, you go like, wow, would we like to have this technology? We could go to Putin and we could talk to Putin and tell him we're here to, whatever. We could go to the Arabs and say we're ally, and we tell you to do whatever, that you could get into people's heads. And that's the main, and it may have actually been the main technology that they wanted. Forget about how the craft works and that kind of stuff. The metals, it was this mental phenomena technology. And that's why you see in the 1950s, the CIA starts to work on LSD, and they start working on psychic driving at McGill University in Canada. They're working on this mental phenomena stuff because they knew that the consciousness was the key to the whole
Where'd you go?
Wheel in the craft. So to me, that may be the main technology that they're trying to protect, is this consciousness technology that we develop it before the Russians and the Chinese and Al-Qaeda. And that may be the whole crux of why there is this big cover-up.
Right. Well, you're right on. And obviously, we do have that technology already. We've been deploying it for some time. I know you know this. The synthetic telepathy, obviously, the stuff I was interfaced with artificial intelligence. Now, that's all been weaponized. It's used in the military and the black programs. So I'm very, very clear that technology is being deployed. Now, who they're using it on and who they're influencing with it is another scenario. But I do know that a lot of us who are test pilots for the technology are the ones that know the technology because we were used as guinea pigs. But, but you're spot on about everything. I mean, it's about controlling the mind, obviously. And if you can control the mind of anyone here on this world, or the masses simultaneously, that's a heck of a lot of power. So I can certainly see why they would use it and weaponize it in their military.
Or to protect the technology from being used against you, because that's one of the things you got to look at is, I mean, you may say, well, we're the good guys, we're, God's chosen race or whatever we want to call it. We're the good guys and we're going to save the world with it and do good stuff or whatever. But I mean, if you were going to give it to ISIS, are they going to use it to improve the world, or are they going to use it to kill Americans? Right. That's basically their number one thing. So if you're in the military, you got to have some sort of understanding for what these guys, with the way the military mind works, is that you want to keep it from everybody else, and so at any cost you try to develop it slowly. And I think one of the things with yours was that you can't openly test this stuff. You can't go into a laboratory. So that's what they do, is they'll do it with a sort of a deniable type thing, where they'll pick off people like you in the public and do the testing there, so that you may have one person fall out, but there's no documentation, there's no study, there's no money trail, there's nothing that really people can really trace it back to, and so they get into the situation where they're desperately trying to develop this thing behind the scenes, and but that's what I think, and especially when it comes down to, I always tell the story that when I first had this consciousness download, that I suddenly realized that this was the basis of the whole thing, was this consciousness thing. I gave this lecture in 2013, and I always tell the story about how they had this woman that said, are you going to talk to this woman? And I thought, well, wow. I mean, I guess I agreed to talk to her. And they said, well, yeah, I'll talk to her. And they said, well, she's coming to see you on the Monday. So after my lecture, and this woman comes to the house where I'm staying, and she says, what did Stacy tell you about me? And I said, I don't know. I'm just supposed to talk to you. She said, good. She comes walking in, and she's the one that told me that she was flying the ships, that she was working for the government. She was doing remote viewing and all sorts of stuff for the government, and that she was flying these different ships. And I said, and I'd never heard this before. I mean, a lot of my UFO career, I think, is just basically waking up at certain periods. And this is one of the times where I sort of woke up because I'd never heard this, and other people had heard it, but I'd never heard this, that you use the mind to fly the craft. And this is how they move this thing around. And I didn't know this. And so she's telling me this, and I said, you're flying the flying saucer? And she said, yeah. And I said, you are? And she said, yeah, I've flown 3 different types. I said, well, how do you do that? And she said, with your mind. And then I realized what the secrecy about meeting with this woman, why she wanted to meet with me, because I'd given this consciousness lecture about the importance of consciousness. And then suddenly I started getting all these people like Isley came forward, and she talked about the fact that she had been, flying the craft. She had sitting in the chair and all this sort of stuff. There was all these different witnesses that suddenly came forward, and I realized that this is the critical element that maybe what the secrecy is about. And when I started looking at it, I even show an experiment, and I sort of now get into the science part. I show an experiment that was done and what I was doing is I was checking back, and his name always escapes me. This is a guy. He was a kid who built this rocket, and General LeMay sort of sponsored this kid, and he fires this rocket into Area 51, and he's like 17 years old, whatever. And I'm checking this guy. He's in the UFO community. He's the one that talks about. He shows an engine.
I know who you're talking about, and his name escapes me. Blast.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole story was that it was a hoax. So I'm checking this because as soon as this symbiotic relationship thing came, that the craft is alive, I remembered this guy's story, and I said, well, maybe this guy's telling the truth. So I go and I start checking the story, and he sort of disappeared into nowhere. And then I found out he'd been to the Pear Lab, which is the Princeton lab that was doing all the remote viewing, ESP experiments and stuff like that. And
David Adair. Is it David Adair?
David Adair. That was the guy.
Okay.
So I found out that David Adair had been to the Pear Lab. And so I'm looking at the Pear Lab, and then I'm doing sort of different word searches and whatever. And suddenly this thing pops up about the F-22 Raptor. And there was a rumored story that the Pear Lab had developed technology on the F-22 Raptor jet fighter that their mind is used to fly this craft, and that they had built some sort of shielding thing to stop it from affecting the engines. So this was just a story, and so I start following this story, and it goes to the University of Southern Florida. Now, this is 2004. This pops up, and anybody can look this up. All you have to do is Google search F-22 and rat brain. And this is 2004. This is 10 years ago at University of Southern Florida. What they do is they take 25,000 neurons. Now, the human brain has got 100 billion neurons. They take only 25,000 neurons from a rat brain. And we always have this idea, we got this big brain, and that's why we can do all these amazing things, and we have all these techniques. And I asked George Filer, because I give this lecture in New Jersey, and George Filer was U.S. Air Force. And I said, George, how easy is it to fly a simulator on a F-22? He said, it's pretty difficult. So what they do is they take these 22,000 neurons of a rat brain, and they put them in a petri dish. And the guy describes this, and you can see the video. It's about a 5-minute video on the internet. And you see the brain start to, instead of dying, which you'd think it would, suddenly these neurons start to connect, and you can see them talking, and then it forms this little brain. And after 3 days, all these neurons are connecting, and they're talking, whatever. And what they do is they have these electronic electrodes wired into the petri dish, and they take an F-22 simulator, and they put the electrodes to this 25,000 neurons, and they send a signal, and the rat brain talks back. So they'll send a low frequency signal. The rat brain sends a high frequency signal. And what they're doing is, if the plane is going too low, they'll send a low frequency signal or a high, whatever. And the brain will send back the opposite signal, which levels out the plane. So from side to side, it levels out the plane, top to bottom. And next thing you know, this rat brain, these 25,000 neurons, is flying an F-22 simulator. And then they show on the video, you'll see on the video, they actually take the weather and they put like massive thunderstorms and wind and the worst possible weather. And the rat brain continues to fly the simulator. And so this is what it all comes down to. It comes down to this symbiotic relationship that when you talk to people who have been on the ship and who talk about this, we'll talk about the fact that the ship is alive, and it's a symbiotic relationship between the people who are flying the ship and the ship, that you can actually just sort of decide you're going to go here, you can go right, left, whatever, and your mind just moves the thing around. And so you can see
virtual.
you can see this technology that's involved, and that in 2004 in Southern Florida, they actually have an experiment where you can actually see this technology in operation. And then I watched the technology. It was just like the lab just went black. It was like gone. And you would think, well, they would develop the next stage, and you don't see anything at that lab after that. Mm-hmm. But in 2004 already, they had this little rat brain flying an F-22 simulator, which is basically you can sort of see where this technology is going.
Yeah, absolutely. And take it a step further without the craft and just go with the mind and interconnecting with consciousness and moving from one dimensional space to another and actually changing your molecular structure. Now, I know that sounds really out there, but I know that can be done. So once again, you're phase shifting into another dimensional space through consciousness. And that is really what you've been studying and what you've been researching and talking about is really the key to this whole thing is evolution with consciousness in motion.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're the military, people will say, well, the guy, John Alexander is big at this. He says, well, nobody's interested. And it's like, give your head a shake. That's what DARPA is all about. DARPA is there to advance ideas that nobody else will advance. And they got caught once with Sputnik. And they got caught with the remote viewing thing, where they suddenly realized that the Russians were doing telekinesis, and they had these agents who were trying to telepathically to kill people and to influence leaders, to get people around the president of the United States and try to influence them. And they held all these stories about Russian agents who were trained that they would go into a bank and they'd go to the teller and just look at the teller and hypnotize the teller into giving all the money over. And so they were working on these kind of experiments. And to me, it's like the government isn't interested in this kind of stuff. Just the idea alone that if this happens to be true and you didn't work on it, and suddenly, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or Al Qaeda or whoever develops this technology, it's game over. It's game, set, and match. Because in today's battles in war, the battle's over in a day or 2 days. You haven't got 10 or 20 years to develop the technology. You've got to be within days if you're going to be behind. But what you want to do is be 5 years ahead, as what happened with the atomic bomb in World War II. So the Americans dropped the atomic bomb, and of course the Japanese go to the emperor and say they dropped these atomic bombs, and of course the emperor will say, okay, let's do it. Let's make a bomb, and we'll drop the bombs on their city. How long is it going to take? And they say, well, about 6 or 7 years to develop a bomb. It's over. I mean, you just basically throw up the white flag and surrender. And so that's what people don't realize is it's this lead time, what's called lead time in weapon technology, that even if you're a couple of days ahead in the technology, you can win the war. So it comes down to keeping it as quiet as you can, behind the scenes, developing the technology, expanding that lead time, knowing that the Russians are probably working on it, the Chinese are probably working on it, and you want to find out what they know, how far you're ahead of them, so that if you have to at some point use it, which they won't use it unless they absolutely have to, then you can win the war. And because that's the way the military mind works. That's the way they get trained. That's the way they get paid. And it's always the old idea, which actually is an idea that fits into the UFO situation, which is something I've been talking about as well now. And what I say is this idea of oneness, which you'll talk of, which comes up with the people who've been on board. They will talk about this idea of oneness. For example, there's Brett Oldham is a guy who wrote a book called Children of the Greys, and he's in your area. He's in Las Vegas, and he talks about the fact he's not a friend of the Greys, and they're doing this and that, and they're sort of bad guys. And at one point, he asked them, "What's your concept of God?" And they say, we are one with the one who is all. And so there's this concept that you'll see in all sorts of different types of downloads, so whether it's spiritual downloads with people who claim to be in touch with spirits or angels or aliens or whatever, this oneness idea. And what I say is this is a key point that comes up that I I'm almost getting to be like Jimmy Swaggart. I mean, this is my shtick where I say, if you're looking at evil and good, you've got to look at this concept of oneness in the universe, which Edgar Mitchell talked about when he was coming back from the moon, this samadhi experience where you realize everything is one. And basically, I go into the concept of evil, this whole idea that I think the aliens are trying to get across is the idea that whenever there's separation, then you're going to get evil. So it's like we're the good Americans, we're the good Canadians, the Japanese are bad guys, they're evil, therefore we can drop bombs on them and not feel any remorse about the fact that we killed 100,000 women and children. And it's because it's good guys versus bad guys, cowboys versus Indians, God versus the devil, this whole thing. If you can create that separation, that's the way the physical universe works. And we now realize that the physical universe, this whole idea of the random universe, that everything is random, it's all a big accident. And surprisingly, that the vast majority of neurologists and psychologists believe this whole idea that consciousness is basically just an emergent phenomena from the brain, that it's basically like an illusion. It's just basically something that the physical world is producing, that you have no free will. And I couldn't believe it when I started to read this, that the vast majority of these guys actually believe this nonsense, that, you and I are having this conversation tonight, not because we made a free will decision at some point in the past to get together to talk about this, but because our neurons were just going in certain directions and our neurons led us to do it. That the real and guys like Stephen Hawkins, who they're bringing out the big movie on him now, this big feature movie about his great life and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this guy believes this. I mean, he says this free will is an illusion. And so you get to this and you say, like, this is why we're in so much trouble, because if you get into this idea that it's us versus them, then what it comes down to is, I use the analogy of the tree, that we're all a tree. And the world is one, and you've got to realize that we are all part of the one, and the one is made up of all the parts, and that you have your responsibility, like a leaf on a tree, to provide to the tree, and the tree provides you life, and you provide life to the tree. And the way we work it in the world is we say there's bad things. So the Al-Qaeda is bad. The Arabs are bad. They're trying to blow up our kids in school buses. Therefore, that branch over there on the other side, the Arab branch, we got to cut that branch off. And then, of course, the Arabs say, well, the Americans are the satanic. They're infidels. They're the evil ones, so they got to cut our branch off. And we spend our whole history of the universe is we just cut each other's branches off. We determine who's evil. We drop bombs on those guys. They drop bombs on us. And basically what the aliens, I think, are trying to get across to us, if you keep cutting the branches off the tree, eventually there's no branches left and the tree is going to die. Yep. And so you got to realize that we're all one, and that the Arabs are part of the one with us. So that if you try to kill all them, you're cutting off your own arm. And this is one of the basic concepts that when I look at what's happening in these downloads, because I'm very interested in what people who have had downloads, or who have claimed to have been on the ship, or who claim to have talked to these aliens, or whatever, because I think that's as close as you can get to what this phenomena is, whatever the phenomena is. What we've spent a lot of time in ufology doing is watching lights fly around in the sky, which doesn't tell you anything except that something's going on. Right. It's not until you actually do what Travis Walton did, is go and try to flag one down and have them zap you and bring you on board the ship, or you get picked up and brought on board the ship, or you get some information. So to me, those are the people that I spend, I'd say 99% of my time, is people who have got downloads through whatever method, whether it's angels or spirits or whatever they're claiming they're getting these downloads, and people who've been on board the ship, because you start getting all these different things where you have potential for actually doing things, where people, as I mentioned to you before, are actually getting downloads, downloads of inventions. And Bigelow is one of the people who's watching these. I know four top businessmen, very rich guys, who are spending a lot of time, and they follow contactees and experiencers because they're being given downloads. They're being given inspirations, inventions, and stuff like that. And they're doing it for very monetary reasons, that they want to find out what it is. The same as when you get into the Millab thing, you get people who have had experiences, abductions, whatever, and then you get the military who wants to find out what's going on. So they re-abduct those people, drug them, bring them in, and trying to find out what's going on. So everybody realizes that these downloads are taking place. And I think it's critically important because these people are being given messages. And as I mentioned to you before, I have a number of people, and it's very weird, people who have no mathematical background who will describe the fact that they are getting mathematical downloads. And they always say the same thing to the aliens. You're wasting your time. I know nothing about mathematics. You're just wasting your time. And the aliens always tell them, when the time is right, you will know what this means. And let me give you the prime example, and I'll give you the two people. I'll name the two people where it happened. The first one, and you probably know Suzanne Chancellor, who runs Random Alien Brains Droppings. She does a lot of interviews. She's an experiencer. She's very interested in talking to experiencers. She tells the story, and this is a number of years ago. She's talking about her own personal experience. She says she's on the ship, and she gets one of these things where they have the big screen, the big sort of the 3D hologram in there, and they show this mathematical formula. They show it to her, and she says, "You're wasting your time. I know nothing about mathematics. Nothing means anything to me." And they said, "When the time is right, you will know what this means." And at another point, and it may not be related, may be related. At one other point, they say to her, "The cure to cancer is something you use every day." So she tells the story, and I put it in the back of my head, as I do with everything. I try to listen to as many interviews, like I'll listen to all the interviews you do with people and interviews, and all this stuff goes into my head. And then I just sort of wait, and at one point it will all just sort of pop out and make sense, and it'll all come out. So that was the one story. I put it in the back of my head. And then about a year later, this Greg Oldham comes up forward, and he writes the book Children of the Greys, and he's talking about these, he considers them not very good guys, the Greys. They stole his kid, and they, were playing with him, and they tortured him, and all this sort of stuff, and all the sex stuff, and he's not very happy. So his book is not a pro-Grey book. But at one point, he says, they showed me a formula. On a screen, they showed me this formula, and I said to them, "No, you showed me the formula. I know nothing about mathematics. You're wasting your time." And they said, "It's the cure to cancer." And he said, "Well, let me write it down." They said, "No, you can't write it down. You can just look at it." And he said, "Well, nope, you can't write it down. You can only look at it." So here we have these two stories where one is showing the formula and told about the cure to cancer, something you use every day. Then the other one is somebody who's shown the formula and is told it's the cure to cancer. So I figured, well, here's a potential. Now, what are you going to spend your money on? I said to these two people, I will pay for the regression. I don't want to know anything in the regression. I just want to know one question. Get you regressed. And I talked to Yvonne Smith. I said, "Yvonne Smith, if I get these people and they give you a formula, can you, under regression, recover the formula?" She said, "That's one of the best things we can do. It's one of the clearest things we can do." So I said, "I will put up the money. I will get the regression done. I don't really care about anything else in the regression except for this one question. What is the formula? Write the formula down. I want to see if the two formulas are the same." And then these people started to, because most people don't want to be regressed. So that's where it stands right now. Neither one really is into should they be regressed. But you have these kind of situations where you can see that there's potential, that we are actually being led and we are being possibly given stuff that helps us along, that it's not like they're here to steal our gold or to eat us or whatever. It's like when people talk about evil aliens, I say, well, why are they teaching people to fly the ship? I mean, what, do you taste better when you know how to fly the ship? Or like, why are they teaching people to fly the ship? Or these stories that you get, numerous stories of little kids in a room where they would talk about these stories about the balls, the 3 different color balls, and they're told to levitate these 3 different color balls. And one is very easy, one sort of, and one they can't do. They can't look up. They can just see the feet of the people in the room. And all these kids are gathered around and they're being taught to levitate stuff. So why are they teaching us to levitate stuff? Why are they showing us mathematical formulas? Why are they giving these downloads? It's almost like we're being led along this path, and that different people, the experiencers, who Yvonne Smith calls, I think the prime word is the chosen. She wrote her book about the people, experiencers and abductees, and she called them the chosen. And I say they are the chosen. And I don't know if I told you this story, but I was at UFO Congress. And have you been there?
I don't think so.
Okay, UFO Congress is big. It's like 1,500 people registered there. And they have the experiencer group, which started with a couple of people in a room. And now you go to UFO Congress, and it's like we went there, and they said, you can't get in. It's standing room only. I went, what? And they said, but there's another room down the hall, but it's full too. And I went, what? And it's like they got 150 people. And these are people who believe had some interaction, they've experiencers or abducted or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went and we stood in the room, and the room was just jammed. And so Yvonne Smith is running one and her assistant is running the next room. And people are just basically, they're crying and they're talking about their experience and what they believed happened to them. And nobody's judging anybody. It's just go this side of the room, you tell your story, and nobody's really saying, Yvonne's not asking them anything or directing them, whatever. People are just telling their stories. And this is a big thing. It's like 8:00 in the morning, 7:00 at night. The room is jammed. Everybody, these people have to be there. It's like almost like Alcoholics Anonymous. They have to tell their story. So I'm in there, and I said to them, one of them was complaining about how it's tough and, whatever. And that's when I talked about what I learned through my life in dealing with contactees and experiencers is these are the most important people in the room. And I said, it could be tough. You've got these various things that you have to go through, but you've got to realize the fact that we know a lot of stuff about abductions. The one thing we know for sure is that it's an generational phenomena, that if you were taken, your parents were probably taken, your kids are probably being taken, that you have been chosen, that you have been picked for whatever this is. And I said, if you understand, because I don't know how many of these people know about consciousness and the connections to consciousness, I said, if you understand the UFO situation, you realize it is not flying saucers, metal ships, little aliens, whatever. It is this basis of the universe. If you understand it, you understand consciousness, you understand reality, you understand the basis of the universe. This is the most important story of all times. This is you've been chosen to play in the Super Bowl. This is the Super Bowl of all stories. You got picked to play. You may be the water boy. You may be the quarterback. You don't know what you're doing, but you have been picked to play in this game. And you better realize that you could have been born, in an untouchable in India, live in a junkyard, trying to find something valuable enough to sell that can get you food for tomorrow. You could have been born handicapped. But you got picked to play in the Super Bowl. And you should realize that you may have the answer to some sort of thing, figure out what you're supposed to be doing and develop it. And they all sort of sat up and they suddenly realized, yeah, this is probably true, that it may be tough. There may be some bad parts to it, but that same as you and and I say it to researchers as well, is that when you look at people who criticize you in the outside world, you go around and they're critical of you in the phenomena and believing this kind of stuff. And then you look at the people who are criticizing you and you go to one of their functions. What it basically is like, we say, a cocktail party. And it's like, what are your kids doing? Who's sleeping with who? Who's doing this? And it's basically the whole conversation is about people who aren't in the room. It's gossiping about people who aren't in the room, or it's living your life through sports, living your life through other people.
Right.
That you look at their life and you go like, man, you people are like totally lost here, man. I mean, at least we're talking about things. We're talking about ideas. We're talking about reality, what life is really about, that these people are just sort of sleepwalking through life. And that's where I say to people, even people like yourself or myself, whatever dragged us in, I know it dragged me in. But whatever drags you in, you realize that you're playing this very, very sort of important game, that you have the sort of the answers to reality, the answers to how the world works, that you may be able to develop this, that you're farther along the road and that you have something very valuable to contribute to the world. And that's where I say people have to realize that it's a very sort of valuable position to be in, and that you and I, when we're talking about this kind of stuff, we're talking about the sort of the basis of what life is all about. Mark Twain's two questions. Mark Twain says there are only two important questions in the world. Number one, 2 days. The number one day that's most important in your life is the day you're born. The number two day, the number two time is when you find out why. That's the second most important day. And that's what you and I are discussing, is why are we born? And majority of people don't realize that or don't deal with that until some doctor says, get your affairs in order. You got 3 months to live, and they suddenly scramble around. What the hell's going on? Why was I born? What's going to happen? All this sort of stuff. And you and I spend our whole life. So when I talk to people about UFOs, I say, you think that we go to UFO conventions or conferences and that we're sitting there talking about little aliens and stuff. It's never about that. It's always about reality, consciousness. What does life mean? It's like going to church almost. Like it's like a real sort of elevated thing on ideas. And there's almost no discussion about flying saucers. There's almost no discussion about landing traces or mathematics or anything like that. It always gravitates in every conversation that you're in. When you go to these events, it always gravitates to this whole thing. What's life about? How does this fit into life? So I think it's so important that what the show that you're doing, what you're contributing to the world, what you're putting out there, is to even if you get one or two people, it's this raising of the consciousness that we talk about it. And I can see the consciousness rise from when I got in it. People will say, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And I say, give your head a shake. Go back 150 years and say women shouldn't vote. This is everybody knew women shouldn't vote, that blacks should use separate washrooms, that gays should be castrated the first time that they get caught, and that you lock up gays, and that there's no gay marriage, and that blacks can't marry whites. And you start looking at it and like, man, we have moved along. I mean, consciousness is rising. We are starting to realize that the world is one, that you can't just dump stuff into your neighbor's yard, or smoke in public, or contaminate, build a nuclear power plant wherever you want. That the oneness of the environment, of the world, is now become. You can see the consciousness is rising, and the more we put ideas into the world, even if only one or two people get affected every time you do a show, the consciousness is rising. And it comes down to, I always tell the story, and I was so proud to be involved, because when I travel to the United States, when I travel, I always listen to Rush Limbaugh because I think he's really funny. I listen to him, and it's the only show you can really get on when you're traveling across like Nebraska or Wyoming, because it only comes through big stations. So I listen to Rush Limbaugh, and I remember the day I heard him say it. He said, "That's it. That's it. Give it to them. They got it. Gay marriage, they've got it. Give it to them." And I went, wow, there it is. Over the hump. That's the rising of consciousness to a point where suddenly the most conservative guy, the guy that's most backwards on the whole subject, says, I give up, give it to him. And then down the other side we go. And that's what's happened with every social and political movement, whether it's gay rights or the African civil rights movement or whatever the movement is. It gets to a point where suddenly everybody says, okay, and everybody accepts the fact that blacks should be able to use the same washrooms as whites. And we sort of then suddenly realize, yeah, it's wrong. And that's what I say is, you and I instinctively inside ourselves know what's right and what's wrong. And all you have to do is get people to talk about it. And in the end, you get 90% of people who suddenly make the decision, and they'll make the right decision. And that's when the world will advance.
Right. It's multidimensional perspective, really. It's operating from a higher level of consciousness. Once again, it's about the consciousness thing, because the more you start resonating with universal frequencies, the more evolved you become. And I am beginning to think that a lot of these contactees are spiritually evolved. They may not be awakened or aware of it fully, but I think that's one of the things that attracts them, or, the extraterrestrials is why they're attracted to these beings. So I don't know what your impression is of that one.
Yeah. It's almost that's a chicken egg thing. Is somebody an experiencer because the aliens pick them, or is this whole soul contract thing where they are picked because they are more spiritually advanced, which goes to the soul contract idea. And that was one of the things I'm pushing inside the experiencer community, and the people who are doing the regressions are still fighting against this. And what I said, because Mary Rodwell will talk about this, and Dolores Cannon, who's now passed away, will talk about this, that they say if you ask the question, if you get the person in the state of hypnosis, the right level of hypnosis, if you ask them the question at any point in the past, did you agree to be in this situation? 100% of people will say yes. They agreed to this. This goes back before life. The same as John Mack talks about. He has this one case where he talks about he's got this guy and he says, okay, you're with the alien. Okay, is that the first time you saw the alien? The guy says, no, I saw him at 10 years old. Okay, tell me about that. And then the guy talks about the alien at 10 years old. Is that the first time you saw the alien? No. When I was in the crib, I saw the alien. And then he goes at the crib and he tells that whole story. Is that the first time you saw the alien? No. And then next thing he's in a past life and he's talking about dealing with this alien in a past life. The same as Chris Bledsoe, who is the most sort of one of the biggest contactees. This $80 million movie coming out now with Warner Brothers is going to tell his story about his experience. When he's regressed by John Mack's associate, Dr. Michael O'Connor, he's talking about this promise. He's talking about this promise through this whole regression. And O'Connor says, what are you talking about? What's this promise? Can you talk to the aliens? And he said, yeah. And he said, ask the aliens, what's this promise? What are you promising the aliens? And he said, they have been with me since before I was born. And it was this whole idea that you have the advanced people who come into life. And if you do, one of the things, I've had three big inspirations in my life. One of them was this 2012 download where I got the consciousness thing. One was my UFO experience, and the third one was when Dr. Michael Newton lectured at UFO Congress, and that's when it was back in Laughlin, Nevada. This is maybe 10 years ago. And I wasn't, again, like Colin Andrews, I wasn't going to go to the guy's lecture. I had no interest. He was going to talk about, I didn't even know what he was going to talk about. It wasn't any aliens, it wasn't UFOs, so I really, because UFO Congress goes from 8 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. So you don't go to all the lectures. Sometimes you're going for lunch. Sometimes you're meeting with people that are there because it's like big homecoming, everybody there. And so I was going to go and do something else. And then I went to this lecture, and he's the one that did the 7,000 people. He was a clinical psychologist who at one point in one of his regressions where he's regressing people to childhood to try to resolve issues, suddenly the guy goes back into a previous life. And he's an atheist, and he's going like, what the heck's going on? But he's interested in history, and he's interested in the particular battle that this guy was in. So he knew a little bit about it. And he checks it out, and it all sort of fits. And he's the one that developed the technology where he regresses them to this life between life thing, where between your lives, you plan your lives and stuff like that. So he had these 7,000 people, and he wrote 3 different books on this whole thing. And his thing is it's the same reincarnation idea. It's the whole idea that before you're born, you pick your parents, you pick what your role is, and almost like Shakespeare, who I hated when I was in school. I could not stand this. It was like, why can't you just speak English? It was just horrible. I had to take Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, now I quote him. I'm running around quoting him. And Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and they have their exits, and each man plays in many roles. And that's what it basically, the way I look at life now, which influences how I see the UFO thing, is that before you're born, you pick your parents. You basically set up the play. You pick up who you're going to play. You got to work on envy. You got to work on greed. You got to work on this sort of stuff. And whatever it is you've got to work on, you set it up. And at the end of your life, according to what Newton says and what I believe, when he asks his people, basically when it comes to this sort of life review or judgment or whatever people want to call it, the life review, all they ask you is one question: how did it go? Because you planned it. You're the one that ran the whole play, and it's, did you achieve what you wanted to achieve in that lifetime? So when you're looking at the abductee thing, then you look at it in that perspective. If you're looking at it this physical worldview, it's just a random, you're a biological robot, consciousness is an illusion, free will is an illusion, it's all just a big accident. There is no before, there's no after. It's like a light bulb. You turn the light bulb on, the consciousness goes on, the light bulb dies, the consciousness goes away. That's all it is. If you believe in this physical worldview, this random thing, but if you believe that there is something, there's pattern, and you believe this whole thing, then you got to start looking at, in ufology, you got to look at the possibility that it's multiple lives. And that's when it gets into one of the examples I show, the prime one, because if I say it, if I give an example from you, nobody believes it. But if I use the Moody Blues, one of the biggest rock bands of all times, and use them as an example, then people say, well, the Moody Blues said this. And the Moody Blues story is this. Colin Andrews, who's doing his crop circle lectures running around the world, is from Britain. The Moody Blues are from Britain. John Pinder, who's the head lead singer for the Moody Blues in the 1960s, and his lead guitarist, who I think was, it starts with G, the guy's name, they appear at one of Colin Andrews' lectures. And they say to Colin Andrews, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to you and take you for dinner. We've got something we got to tell you. So Colin says, okay, fine. So they go out after Colin gives a lecture, and these 2 top guys from the Moody Blues take him out. And they say, we just want to tell you, we know why we're doing this. And they tell the story. And so it's been well known. It's been written up a number of times that they were abducted in 1967. This is a well-known story. There's 2 of them have directly talked about this. One has drawn the alien that they saw. They're coming back from a concert in Manchester, England. They're going into London. They see this object. It's a red light. Pinder's looking out the back window. He says, look at this, guys. What's this? What's this? And they say, oh, maybe it's a tower. And they're watching this light. And the light keeps following the car. And they're driving along. And then they say, Pinder says, pull over. Let's pull over. Let's watch this thing. And they get out of the car. And the thing lands on a bush across the motorway. And they're watching this thing. And that's the last thing they remember. And the next thing they remember, they're getting back in the car. And they're all sort of scared. And they get in the car. And they arrive back in London 3 hours late. So they knew they were abducted. None of them denies they were abducted in 1967. And this is early on. This is one of the first abductions. So
Mm-hmm.
they tell Colin Andrews this story. They tell him a bunch of other stories, but the story they tell him, and Colin says the two guys are telling the story. So it's going back and forth. One guy tells, the other guy tells the story. So he says, this is not something they made up. Because these both telling the same story. He said, tell them about this. And they tell about the story that before they were born, they remember being in a circular environment. They were in a ship and like on a flying saucer, and there's some elderly or wise people, and they're sitting around this table, and they're told what they're going to do. They're going to be musicians in this lifetime, and they're going to go into there and they're going to put in lyrics into their music. So they're telling Colin, we knew that this is why we put the lyrics into our music, because we had this arrangement before we were born. And so, and then the lead guitarist says to Pinder, he says, tell them about how we came back in the world. Tell them about the hole. And they talk about this black sort of circular thing, how they come into the world. They pick their parents and they come through this black void thing as they enter into the world. Hmm. And so if you and I were to tell the story, you would say, well, it's crazy. But when you hear the Moody Blues talking about this fact that before they were born, that this was all prearranged, then you see the whole UFO thing in a different aspect that you look at. That's why I say the people who are experiencers are the chosen people. They are the highest level of people that they're being picked. It's a chicken egg thing. They're being picked because they're advanced beings. They agreed to it. But in the UFO community, most people won't. And one of the regressionists told me, I don't want to lead the witness. Mm-hmm. I said, what do you mean don't lead the witness? If you do not bring this up, you're leading the witness. If you do not ask them, if you're in a court case and you're sort of coming to me and I'm a lawyer and you say this person is driving me crazy, you've got to get rid of them. I've got to get rid of this person. What's the first thing you're going to do if you're a lawyer? You're going to say, who are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Are you married to this person? Are you living common law? When did you first meet this person? That's a standard question. When did you first meet these people? Where did they come from? When is the relationship? But we don't ask that question. All we do is what I call the CNN interview. We say, so what did they do to you next? Oh, that must have really hurt. I mean, what did they do to you next? How did you feel? The CNN question. How did you feel about this? And we leave them in this cycle of fear, and we go round and around, but we don't ever go back and say, when did you first meet these people? When did you first meet this alien? Right. And if it pops back into another lifetime, then I say it all changes. All you need is one case, whether it's the Moody Blues, whether it's you, me, whoever, all you need is one case confirmed to go into a past life. And this is no longer a physical thing. It's got nothing to do with weighing. It's got nothing to do with other planets. This is a spiritual problem. This is something that goes through many generations, through many lifetimes. And so basically what it comes down to is that you have the soul contract idea that you and I may have made an agreement before we were born that we were going to have these interviews, we were going to do all this kind of stuff, and that we were going to help elevate. We knew that at this point in history, the world would be in a situation where it's environmentally in trouble, where it's got nuclear weapons, and that we have to guide the world. So there is no abductions. The people who were abducted have agreed to this. So there's no abduction. This is all a plan. They've agreed to go through the river of forgetfulness. They've agreed to forget, and they've agreed to play this role. And I even had, when I gave my consciousness lecture, there's a woman in Phoenix who actually went out and got a Newton lecture. She's a very high-level woman. Quickly went out and got a Newton lecture, a regression. And in her regression, this conversation comes up about whether she agreed to this. She said, I didn't. I earned it. And they said, what do you mean? I worked hard to get this position, to be in this position where I'm an experiencer. To her, it was like she earned it. It wasn't just that she volunteered for it. And so the whole thing changes, and the whole perspective of what ufology might be about. If you have multiple lives, the whole thing changes. Then it becomes like a reincarnation thing. Then everything is experience. It's got nothing to do with good, bad, time, space. It's got to do with experience. It's why are you here? Why are you doing this? And you get this whole idea that that all this is moving us to a higher consciousness, to get us away from nuclear weapons, to stop us before we throw the world off an environmental cliff. Because almost everybody, and I don't know if Yvonne Smith was saying this just to say it, but she said every single person she has regressed, and she's done a lot of people, has seen the screen, has been shown the screen of the environmental destruction. Every single one. So if everybody's seeing it, This is an important part of the thing. And then they just generally tell people the same as you and I are passing the message. They pass the message. And you can see the environmental consciousness rising. As I tell people when they say the world's going to hell, I say, do you realize the word ecology, the idea of the ecology of protecting the environment there was nothing before 1935. That's when it started. It's only in the last, not even 100 years that we've had this idea that we have to stop dumping stuff in the river. And you can't just say, I own whatever I want and I can dump stuff in the river. I'll do what I want. Don't tell me what to do. It's completely changed only in the last 75 years. So consciousness is rising. And I think it's this whole idea that people are coming into the world, they're volunteering for these things, and they're moving it step by step, piece by piece, and putting it together. And we are moving along. And that's where I say when you start looking at the whole UFO thing, you see that basically we're just seeing things change. We have 1944. Like I say, when was the last time you saw a Foo Fighters sighting? In 1944, during the war, there was Foo Fighters sightings. They stopped in 1945. They just went away. Then the green fireball started. Then you had the flying saucers. Now you got the triangles. You had ground traces. Now you don't have ground traces. You had people seeing in the 60s and 70s, you had people seeing UFOs with windows in the side. Doesn't happen anymore. Nobody sees windows in the side of UFOs anymore. These different patterns, and you start looking at it, and you go like, "Wow, this is right." People will say, for example, abductions. That abductions is people just sort of remembering that the aliens don't really do it right, so they don't really wipe the memories clear properly, and the person starts to remember a little bit, and I say, well, no, that's not really what's going on, because if you look at Hopkins, Jacobs, they'll say abductions go back to 1900. So if it's a thing where the aliens have to learn how to do this properly, you would say that the most people that would remember what was going on when it was done improperly would be between 1900 and 1961 when Benny and Barney Hill were abducted. But there were no, and I don't care what anybody says, there were no grays. There was nobody talking about abduction before 1961. It was only in 1961. Then suddenly you had, as soon as it came to Travis Walton, then it started to pick up. And then when the Communion book came out, when they put the cover of Communion on bookshelves, that's when thousands of people said, I was abducted. And if you look at it, I say, people, if you don't believe this, all you have to do is go to Amazon.com, go to Communion, where they're selling the Communion book, and read the comments, and you'll see one after another. When I saw that book, I broke out in a sweat. I talked to Suzanne Chancellor, talked about the fact when she first saw it in the front of a bookstore, she had a 1-year-old kid. She said she just about dropped the kid. She just was floored when she saw this book. And that's the thing, there's these triggers, or the Allagash, these 4 artists in the Allagash in Maine, where they don't realize they've been abducted for like 12 years. And at 12 years later, 2 of the 4 suddenly start having bad dreams. Now, what's the chances that exactly 12 years later, 2 of the guys will start having bad dreams? And then they have these dreams, and then the one guy's in a hospital. He's not even sleeping, and he's in the hospital, and they're doing tests on him and trying to figure out why he's not sleeping. And he says, I'm bored. Somebody bring me a book. So they go down to the bookstore in the lobby, and guess what they buy him? Communion. They bring up Communion. They show him the book. What's the chances of them bringing this guy Communion book? He freaks out. They have to restrain the guy. They bring in the psychiatrist to say, what's wrong with you? Why? And he said, well, I didn't like the book. And what's bothered you about the book? It reminds me of my dreams. Then the psychiatrist starts going, and who's the psychiatrist? An associate of John Mack. What's the chance? And then the guy that wrote the book, the guy that wrote all the books on them, just happened to be coming in town. So you see these things that very little is happening randomly. You start looking, and when you look at the whole pattern of what's going on, you say, like, what's the chances this happen? What's the chances this happen? Right. And I even had my own dramatic experience, which I can tell you about, that happened to me, and it happens to do with the development of the free organization. And that is that in 2012, you remember back in 2012, they were talking about the fact that it was, the end of the man calendar, and that all this stuff was going to happen. And I didn't realize until just maybe, I don't know, a month ago, that I was part of 2012 was this absolutely amazing thing that happened to me was when I had this download experience. And when I was in Phoenix, Arizona, it was February the 26th, 2012. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. Colin Anders gives this lecture. I see this document, the Canadian document, talks about mental phenomena. I remember this conversation that Dr. Eric Walker, when the former president of Penn State University, he knows what's going on. He breaks off the conversation and says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? Ben Rich, it pops into my head. Ben Rich has given this lecture in 1993, UCLA, and he says, when he's asked, how does the propulsion work? He says, what do you know about ESP? That's how it works. And so this thing pops into my head exactly the same day. And I asked Chris, I said, well, you sure it was this day? He said, yes, he's pretty sure it was that day. He has, and this is this story where he has this awakening, this abduction awakening in 2007 with his son, and there's 3 other witnesses, and all this stuff starts happening, and he gets into art, and all these really weird things start happening, and now Warner Brothers is putting together an $80 million movie. Julia Roberts may play one of the roles in this movie, and this guy has an experience where he has it in 2007. MUFON goes in there and does this lie detector thing that goes very bad. They ask him 34 questions 4 times, and he's all flustered or whatever. And one of the guys from the FBI, former FBI guy, says one of the questions he was deceptive on. He thinks he's deceptive. So he shuts up. He says, I'm not going to talk anymore. And he goes into quiet exactly the same day that I had the download experience. He basically has an experience where he gets pulled by what he calls the shining lady. And this is a lot of experiences. We'll talk about this. This shining lady, this sort of like, some people see it as an angel type figure. And he's told, Chris, you have a burden and it's yours to carry. I said, do you know what the burden is? He says, yeah, I know what the burden is. It's the message. I have this message to deliver to the world. And now he's got this thing, and now they're going to do this movie. The message is going to be delivered. It happens exactly the same day as my event. So we have that, and then we have, so I see Chris, and I'm at his house, and this is another bizarre story where you say, was this random chance? I'm at his house, and we're in his living room, and we're playing on computer, we're on Facebook, whatever, and his wife and his kids are all gone, and he's got 3 dogs. These 3 dogs are in the room, and he puts them outside the front door. We're sitting there playing on a computer, I'm about ready to head to Florida to lecture for Paula Harris. So all of a sudden I hear Chris say, what are you doing back in the room? And I look, and the 3 dogs are in the living room. So he says, how do you get back in? And we go to the front door. The front door is wide open. He lets them out. I take off. I go to Florida to lecture for Paula. When I get to Florida, there's an email in my basket that says, it happened twice more after you left. I put them out, and I went back in. I'm sitting in the living room, and suddenly the dogs are back in the house again, and the front door is wide open. So I put them back out again, and then I went to the bathroom. I came back out, and they're back in the house again. And well, whatever, I mean, you forgot to leave the door. I didn't even answer the email. I just put it to the side. Really didn't think about it. And so I lecture for Paula Harris, and this is where the key comes to free. I'm lecturing for Paula Harris, and I'm doing my consciousness lecture. So I'm talking about consciousness, and I'm contacted by Ray Hernandez, who's the guy who started Free. And he has an experience 4 days after I have my download experience. He has it on March the 4th. I had February the 26th. On March the 4th, he has this sort of download experience where he has this experience where he's in a room. He's up in bed. His wife's very religious, very Roman Catholic. She's downstairs and she's praying to the Mother Mary, and the dog has been paralyzed. The dog is 16 years old. The dog has had a stroke. It's paralyzed. They're gonna take it to the vet on Monday. And she's praying. She's at the bottom of the stairs, and suddenly this UFO appears in the living room, and it's got these 2 little rods sticking out of it, and she's yelling, Ray, come down. And he's lying in bed like, leave me alone. It's Sunday morning. I want to sleep. And he's lying there. She keeps yelling and yelling. So okay, whatever. And he gets up and he walks down the stairs, and he looks down the stairs, and there's this object. He sees this object with no sides, but it's sort of like a sort of a tube type object, but it has no sides, and it's moving around. And he looks and he goes, whatever. And he turns around and he goes back to bed. And he's lying in bed and he's going, what did I just do? And he jumps out of bed. He goes racing down to see if this object's still there. And he looks, and here's his wife, and the dog is completely cured. The dog's running around like it's like 2 years old, and she's going, oh, hallelujah, he's cured. And she thinks it's God that's cured the dog. So he has this experience right after we have this download experience. So I go, a year later, I'm giving my lecture. I see Chris Bledsoe. This dog experience happens. I go to lecture for Paula Harris. And he comes to me and he says, or he wants to come to the conference. He's never been to a conference. All he knows is there's a consciousness connection to the UFO phenomena. And he says, because they had this first experience, then he said suddenly his wife starts seeing these huge, he said like massive, the size of stadiums, these lights over top, these huge objects over top of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes out of the house the one day, and he says, well, I'll see if I can do it. My wife says she can do it. I want to see if I can do it. And so he goes, I want to see the beautiful ships that my wife describes. And he's talking, whatever. And he says, nothing happens. He's there for 15 minutes. He figures, was a waste of time. He said, all of a sudden he looks over, and over top of his neighbor's house, he said it was like a Wembley Stadium over top of the guy's house. This massive, huge object sitting there. And he yells at his daughter, because his daughter said, I want to see a UFO. If you ever see a UFO, and she yells, get out, get out. She comes out, she's watching it, and then he's a tax attorney. He's an IRS tax attorney. And some guy's bringing him papers. And so this guy comes up, he's a witness, and they're looking at this huge object, whatever, and this happens. And so he writes me, before I go to Florida, he writes me and he says, you gave this lecture. I heard you on a radio talk show, which is why these radio talk shows are important. You never know who's listening. He hears me on a radio talk show talking about consciousness. And he says, I don't know who to go to. I just know consciousness is involved, because my wife was talking to these things and she can bring them in. And they talked about this incident in Mexico where they actually shut the airport down. She goes home to visit her relatives in Mexico, and this huge thing appears and they shut the airport down. So she's bringing these things in, and he says, I don't know what's going on. He says, it's just turned my life around. He's only sleeping 2 hours a day. He's reading books on ESP, on near-death experiences, on quantum physics, on consciousness. His wife thinks he's totally lost it, and he contacts me and he says, I got to know what's going on. You dealing with consciousness, what's going on? And I said, I'm lecturing. I just happen to be lecturing in Florida. Come to the lecture. You can hear my lecture. We'll talk. So he says to his wife, he's no interest. Like, this is all Jesus. Don't leave me alone. This is a waste of time. He says, well, we'll go for a second honeymoon. We'll go up to this thing. So he drags her along to this thing. I give my consciousness lecture. We talk. They go to the experiencer thing, which now they have on almost every conference. They have the experiencer thing. He tells his story about his experiences. And then 3 days later, after he goes home, after I give the consciousness lecture, we talk. 3 days later, he has a download. He's driving into Miami. He's in rush hour traffic, 8:30 in the morning. Suddenly, he's got a voice in his head, and he's got visions, and he's got a wheel of fortune, and he sees like a wheel of fortune thing moving around, and there's got near-death experiences and consciousness and all this sort of stuff. And he gets this idea: you have to start a group. So he phones up this woman who says, talk to Mary Rodwell in Australia. He talks to Mary Rodwell. Mary Rodwell puts him in contact with Rudy Shield from Harvard University. He says, I will help you start this group. I will be one of your advisors. He's the head of the astrophysics department at Harvard University. He's into consciousness. He's into how consciousness works. And he says, I want you to talk to Edgar Mitchell. Gives him Edgar Mitchell's He phones Edgar Mitchell the same day. Edgar Mitchell says, I've been waiting for your phone call. I'll help you start this group. I'll be on your board of advisors. Suddenly now they got this thing with like the who's who of everybody in consciousness and all this kind of stuff on this board by this thing that happened 3 days after I gave this consciousness lecture, where he gets this download. He's driving through traffic, and suddenly the aliens tell him what to do. And he's like me now. He's saying, the aliens tell me exactly what to do. They don't directly tell me, but this will happen, this will happen. And I just follow the pattern, and everything is being put together. And this is like a massive group. And some of the people are not using their names. I know who they are, but some of the people that are on the board of directors of this thing, and it just started in September. And these are guys who have consciousness as one of the key constituents. Again, people think it's a UFO group. It's aliens and stuff like that. But basically, you're looking at quantum physics. They're looking at telepathy. They're looking at consciousness. They're looking at the whole science aspect of this thing. And they believe, whether it's Edgar Mitchell or Shield or Ray or any of these people, they believe that they can actually explain scientifically with a mathematical formula what's going on. So this is all. That's why I say I'm very optimistic now in the field that this thing is moving along. That we understand an awful lot of what's going on. We are not stupid anymore.
Oh, not at all. And you're a mover and a shaker with this as well. And it seems to me like you're activating the DNA of people who attend your lectures. And that's another way of going to the next level of consciousness. When their frequency gets activated, the DNA opens up more and more to a point where they become more enlightened, and
Yeah.
more information starts pouring down. So that's really fascinating, this information that you're sharing with us tonight.
Because it did happen to me too. I mean, that's my whole experience has been that I really didn't intentionally do anything. I mean, when I had my first experience, the only reason I went out to have my first experience was I wanted to see what everybody was looking at. This is the newspaper; it was being talked about all the time, so I wanted to see what everybody was talking about. There's no reason I went out there, and an hour later, this thing flew by the car, right in front of the car, and now I look back and say, well, that probably wasn't random chance. Mm-hmm. And when I had the consciousness thing, I mean, I wasn't going to go into the lecture. And when I came out of the lecture, I mean, I couldn't think when I had this download about consciousness. And then the same thing when I gave the lecture in 2013, I thought, well, I've solved the thing. I've got consciousness here and I've figured this all out. And then I'm at my book table in the big room where they have a huge room where all the vendors are. And all these women are coming and handing me their books on consciousness. And I'm going, geez, I've been sleeping. I mean, I have this reoccurring sort of nightmare that I go along and then suddenly something makes sense, and I suddenly realize like I've been totally off track. And so it's almost like these awakenings, one after another. And Ray is using the same sort of thing where they're using this sort of download thing where if you sort of open yourself up and just say, the way I describe it is like you're a blind guy and you're sitting on a horse. And you say, okay, horse, wherever we're going. And you just go wherever the horse goes. And so when you open yourself up and you stop trying to fight it, then things seem to sort of come together, mm-hmm. and you just do what you can. So, I see very, very little random now. I see a lot of stuff where things are fitting together. And there's even a book that I've got the manuscript finished, and it's this whole download thing where I look at this whole idea that, the way I describe it is, we used to, 150 years ago, we used to think that the world, what you saw in the world was all there was, that it's the visible spectrum. And if you said there's ultraviolet, there's infrared, there's radio waves, TV waves, and all this sort of stuff, people say, are you crazy, man? There's just the physical, just what you can see. That is the world. And now we're in the situation where we have consciousness. And if you talk to people in the neurologists that I'm talking about, or the neuroscientists, or the psychologists who believe this random worldview that we're biological robots and all this kind of stuff, they will just say, no, it's just consciousness. And you say, what do you mean it's just consciousness? What about the subconscious? No, that's just the mind gets scrambled up and it's dreaming, and that's still the consciousness. It's just consciousness. And you say, well, what about the superconscious? What about people who can do telepathy or no, it's just consciousness. There's just consciousness. It's like 150 years ago with the visible spectrum. And so what I say is we're stuck in this idea that all there is consciousness produced by the brain, when it's this whole spectrum, it's this massive spectrum of other consciousness things. And that basically what it comes down to, my model is that you have two sides of the brain. You have the right brain, the left brain. The left brain is the rational brain. I call it the asshole brain. It's the one that when you're trying to meditate, it's the one that's talking. We should buy some. We need some bananas for tomorrow. Can you buy some bananas? And it's the one that just will not shut up. And that's the rational brain that does the analytical. It's in charge of speech, which is very important. The other side is the creative, the spiritual, the right brain. And there's a number of cases and centering around the work that if you're following this Diana Powell, which I say is Nobel Prize stuff. When it comes to consciousness, when it comes to telepathy, this is Nobel Prize. She is on the leading edge, and she's working with autistic savants. Are you familiar with her work?
No, not really.
Okay. She's a neurologist who wrote a book called, she's a trained, John Hopkins trained neuroscientist, was with John Mack at Harvard University Hospital. She wrote a book. She's a psychiatrist, got a practice in psychiatry. She wrote a book called The ESP Enigma. And at that point, and this was based on a couple of experiences she had in her life with people who had ESP, and she was sort of blown away by what they were doing. She got sort of interested in this. And so she wrote a book called The ESP Enigma. She lost her license. Her psychiatric license was pulled. She had to go in front of a board of psychiatrists to prove she wasn't crazy. She made it through, got her psychiatric license back, and she's been working on this. And what she did is the same sort of thing I did. As I said, I worked on this sort of independent of her, was this idea that you get savants, people who are savants, or people who are have Asperger's disease, like Einstein, a number of people, where the left brain you have damaged. With savants, with autistic savants, what you do is you have left brain damage. It's always left brain damage. And so what that is basically what you do is you send the left brain, the one that says we got to buy bananas tomorrow, you send it for coffee. Say, get out of here. And that's how savants can do these, 9-year-old kid multiplying two 6-digit numbers against each other. Rain Man, people who are like the Rain Man could memorize 12,000 books backwards and forwards. Everything in those 12,000 books he knew. He could read 2 pages at the same time, one with one eye, one with the other eye. 6 seconds he could read 2 pages at a time. And so you get these kind of things, but it's the left brain damage that the rational brain, the brain that talks, the one that's doing the rational, has been shut off, and this very creative brain that can tap into this other part of the consciousness spectrum is awakened. It's not inhibited by the left brain anymore. So what Diana Powell has done is she's gone after nonverbal autistics, which is the worst damage. These are where the left brain is so badly damaged that they cannot communicate. But today with autistic savants, you can communicate with them because you can use computers, you can use iPads and stuff like that, where they can actually, or little touch boards where they can communicate, whereas before you couldn't communicate with these people. And what we've realized with these autistic savants is they aren't stupid. They are totally aware of what's going on. They just can't talk. So what had happened was she had heard stories, and everybody's heard these stories about them being very, very telepathic. So she's got 4 of them, and the one is a particular one. I think her name is Haley. She uses the name Haley for this girl. She presented this material in Concord, California at the Parapsychology Conference in August. And just like the UFO community, it was like total shutout. Nobody covered the story, whatever. And I posted on my site, I said, if it was a fair world, this would be Nobel Prize. And what she did is she had this little Haley girl. And what happened with this girl, she has 4 therapists that work with her. And the therapist got the idea that this little girl was reading their mind. And they would do questions with the girl. And the one woman said, "Are you reading my mind? How do you say I love you in German?" And the girl typed out in German the German words for "I love you," and they went, "Wow!" This woman couldn't believe it. She's actually reading my mind. She's never been to Germany, never spoken German, whatever, and she knew it. So she contacts Diana Powell. Now Diana's got 4. There's one in the United Arab Emirates that's actually been written about on the internet that I tried to contact, and then there's this Haley girl, who's the sort of the top one that she's working with. So she does all these tests. So what she does is she goes to the girl and she runs these tests, and the girl actually at one point got 162 digits right, one after another after another. It was the first time she got 7 wrong, and Diane figured it was because she had to use these touch boards, and she's not allowed to go back. So if she makes a mistake because she touches the wrong number, she can't correct. So she had 7 wrong, and Diane says to her, out of these 162 numbers that she was telepathically picking up from the therapist, she said, "You've got 7 wrong," and the girl did it again and got the numbers right. Awesome. And she would do experiments like, not only was she doing telepathic stuff, and she was doing like phony words, like words that weren't words, sentences, and she was like, when she was on, Diane said she was 100% accurate, absolutely got everything. And she would do things like, even the one that was one of the most dramatic experiments, like she would do things where the girl got bored with just guessing what the numbers were, that these 7-digit or 9-digit or 10-digit numbers. She got tired of just guessing what the numbers were. So they made this little game that she's going to do the mathematics, because at one point they thought she was a mathematical savant, because she can multiply 6-digit numbers against each other, but she can't multiply 4 times 7. Which is one of the things that is not genetic. It's not their calculator. They're not calculating because they can't multiply 2 times 3 or 4 times 7, but they can do, a 6-digit number versus a 6-digit number. So they play this little game with this Haley girl, and they say, "Okay, what's the first number?" And the girl will type out what the number is. "Okay, what's the second number?" Multiply them together, and then the girl will come up with the answer. So she's guessing the question and the answer. And at one point, the woman who's the therapist is asking her the question, but the therapist is not a mathematician. So she asks her for the cube root of a 6-digit number, of this long number. So she says, "What's the number?" And Haley punches in the number. She gets the number right. "Okay, what's it divided by?" And Haley puts 3. but it's not divided by, it's the root. What is the cube root of this big number? And the answer she gives is the cube root, not the division. So the therapist thinks the question is divide by 3, and Haley is actually seeing the question. She sees it's the cube root, and she gives the correct answer, and it happened twice, where the girl thought it was divided by 3, and Haley gives the right answer, the cube root. So here you have this girl who does all this sort of stuff. She presents this material, and the video, which apparently the people in the audience described this as that jaw dropping when you saw this girl picking off these numbers, because it's like the odds, if you got 162 numbers, the odds are 10 to the 162nd power. This is absolutely, there's only 10 to the 80th power particles in the known universe. This is how big this number is against chance of this girl accidentally getting 162 numbers right one after another. So this is just massive. And yet when she presents the material at the parapsychology conference, nothing happens. Nobody really does anything with it. And the skeptics come up and say, well, how do we know there wasn't a tape recorder or a little tape recorder in there that was giving her the answers? So now we have to do this whole thing again because we're sort of playing to the skeptics again. It's like the skeptics are running the whole show, and it's just dramatic type stuff that I say if it was a fair world, this is Nobel Prize, because this basically destroys the physical worldview. If you can do this, where you can have a girl at 10 years old who can 100% telepathically pick off questions, sentences, the whole thing, and pictures and stuff like that, and be 100% accurate, that's the end of the physical world. Then the world is completely changed, and you suddenly realize that it's a conscious world, and that consciousness is the dominant thing, and that the whole thing that we have that sort of throws us off the track about the fact that everything's random, everything's chance, that unless you can weigh it, it doesn't count, unless you can see it, it doesn't count, that there's this massive spectrum, and that a savant is able to tap into that, the same as musicians are able to tap in. All musicians are right brain creative people. All experiencers, abductees are right brain creative people. This is what it comes down to. It's the right brain versus the left brain. And if you have left brain damage, it enables you to move into that thing. Or there's even tricks that are used, that inventors use, that people have learned this. And this is why I wrote this manuscript, to show that this is something that you can actually train people to do. And Edison, who was the sort of the greatest inventor of all times, you probably remember that the story was always told that Edison always claimed he didn't sleep. He would just nap in his laboratory. But what he was actually doing was he would sit in a chair in his laboratory. He would take 2 steel balls. He would put them in his hand, and he would sit there and he would sort of meditate. He would sit in the chair, and he'd have a steel bowl down below on the floor. And he would sort of sit there, and he would just sort of fade off, and he would go to sleep. And as he went from the waking state through the hypnagogic state into sleep state, he would go to sleep. His hand would relax. The balls would fall out of his hand, hit the steel bowl, wake him up. He would quickly write down what was in his head. And he was doing this over and over and over again, going through this period of time between sleep and wakefulness, where you move into this altered state of consciousness. And he had 3,000 books that he recorded all this material. And this is where all his inventions were coming from.
Are you talking Edison or Tesla?
Edison.
Okay.
Interesting. Edison used it, but Van Gogh used it. Michelangelo, I heard, I haven't been able to confirm the story. Michelangelo used to do it with his paintbrushes. Michelangelo used to sit with his paintbrushes, and when the paintbrushes fell out of his hand, he would wake up, and that's where he got his ideas. And there was so many of these. So what I've done is I've created a manuscript where I go through all these different inventions, and I say, if you think these inventions are happening by some guy rationally figuring this thing out, think again. Just absolutely think again. And I name off 8 Nobel Prizes that came in dreams, or came where somebody is sitting in a park bench. And I even do the one by Carrie Mullis, which I did on a radio show I did. I think Burns told me, Nancy Burns' husband, he told me this thing, and I didn't realize this one. Carrie Mullis, who got the 1993 Nobel Prize for chemistry, he's the guy that invented the whole thing about duplicating DNA that is used in, crime scenes and stuff, where you can take DNA and you can duplicate the DNA and stuff like that. He invented this technique for doing this. He won the Nobel Prize for it. he talks about the fact when it came. He was driving to his cottage in Northern California when the idea popped into his head about how this whole thing worked. And he kept stopping the car, and his girlfriend was saying, "What are you stopping the car for?" And he was writing this down, and then he'd drive some more, and when more were coming in his head, and he would stop the car, and she was going, "What are you doing?" And he's writing down this invention that he won the Nobel Prize. And the other thing about Kerry Mullis is he's very open about the fact that he was abducted. He goes to his cottage in Northern California, and he's got the groceries. He puts the groceries on the floor in the kitchen of his cottage, and then he goes out to the outhouse. And as he goes to the outhouse, he meets the glowing raccoon. He describes it, and the glowing raccoon says to him, "Good evening, Dr. Mullis." And he goes, "Good evening." And the next thing he remembers, it's daytime, and he gets up and he realizes he's been taken, and he talks about he can't go into the bush anymore. It's the old alien abduction thing where they have this fear, and he can't go into the bush anymore, and he gets upset. So he takes the flashlight, he attaches it onto his gun, and he goes out and he says, "I'm going looking for that raccoon, and I was hoping you'd be in the outhouse. I was waiting to get this raccoon." And he talks about, and then his daughter comes to him and she says, I was missing 3 hours too, Dad. I think you should read the book Communion. And now he's very open about the fact that he was abducted, and so was his daughter. So you get this whole thing, and here's a guy who's a Nobel Prize winner, and you start going through the stories about insulin and the structure of the DNA molecule and all this kind of stuff, and how many people invented this kind of stuff using LSD. And I go through all the LSD inventions and how we would not have computers if it hadn't been for LSD. It was just unbelievable how many of them used LSD for creative things, where they have these creation parties. The Hewlett-Packard engineers would go into a room and they would all take LSD and they would do these different inventions. And the guy that was his name escapes me, the guy that invented the computer, that got the download in 1950 for the computer, which he first showed in 1967. He was into this, and he sort of freaked out the first time he took LSD. He just sort of sat there and stared at the wall. So the second time they were doing this LSD thing with the engineers, they decided they were only going to give him half a dose, and he actually moved spots because he knew what they were going to do, and he wanted to have the full dose. He got a half a dose, and the invention he came up with was an invention called the what was it called? The tinkle wheel. And what it was a little plastic wheel. And what it was you put it in the toilet, and then you teach your little son to go to the bathroom. You say, "Make the little wheel go." And it was like ingenious. Like he developed this with LSD. And it was like, I'm thinking, wow, that's actually a pretty good invention. And I looked on the market. It's not on the market, but this was his invention that he'd come up with. And a lot of these things, the people who did virtual reality, all the virtual reality software on computer, the guy that got credit for all of it said, to a man and a woman, every single person who worked on it was taking LSD. So you get this sort of thing, and all it is it doesn't matter whether you use say meditation, whether you use LSD, whether you get abducted, whether you use this Tesla thing where you use the balls. You can, if you know how to do it, you can move out of this conscious physical consciousness and move into that altered reality where the inventions are, where creativity is, and people are able to do it. And that's why you have so much where you get these parallels, where a lot of people who claim to be experiencers, abductees, also claim to have near-death experiences. And the same thing happens in near-death experiences. You have people in near-death experiences who get inventions, who get downloads, who get all this kind of stuff. You're in the same sort of world, right? And so people are parsing it out and saying this the telepathy, or or I'd have experiences. It happened in Colorado, actually in Boulder, where you are. I went there and I was talking to an experiencer, and I was talking about the fact that channelers are getting this kind of stuff and they're getting these downloads. And they said, whoa, hang on. We don't lump us in with channelers. We are not channelers. We are experiencers. And that's what we're doing, is we're sort of cutting it off. We're saying, well, channelers are one thing, experiencers are another thing, near-death experiences nothing. No, to me, they're all the same thing. It's the same crap, different day.
It's an antenna. Basically, we're antennas. So we're transmitters and receivers. We run energy. And of course, when you mention the LSD, of course, that opens the DNA. So that makes sense. But frequency, as we know, alters consciousness. And that's the bottom line. So as soon as you start altering your frequency, whether it's through meditation or whatever you use as a formula, you're going to open up a higher level of consciousness or 2-1, which indicates also the frequencies are also bands of energy associated with dimensional spaces, which I know you know this. So once we start altering that on a multidimensional level, we start accessing the dimensions, and it's all frequency based, and we get in there and grab all sorts of data. So fascinating, totally fascinating.
Yeah. And that's where when people say to me, well, we really don't know what's going on, it's all a big mystery, it's like, give your head a shake. I mean, come on. I mean, we understand an awful lot. We just want to play the game because we're like the Rodney Dangerfield of the scientific community. It's like we're so embarrassed to be saying that we're in this field that we're going to say, well, we really don't understand what's going on because we don't want people to laugh at us. Well, it's time to get over that and to get busy with what you're supposed to do, because I think we have a lot of the answers. And I think, if we were to get together and have some meetings where you understand a lot of this and get me and a bunch of other people, you could actually sit down and you could develop an awful lot of stuff that would advance, because the thing is, we're all sort of working in our own little beehives. And the thing is to get all of us to put the information, which is what I'm trying to do now, is I've got a number of manuscripts where I'm going to get it out. I'm just going to put it out there in case something happens, because my kid has no interest whatsoever. So where's the will? Where's the money? I mean, get rid of this other stuff. It's like, so is to get it out, is to share the ideas, because I was inspired by different people. When Colin Andrews gives this lecture, then suddenly it awakens me. And when you hear it, when I hear you awaken me. And that's the thing, is to get as much information out as fast as you can to trigger other people, and to get other people's vibration altered and stuff like that.
Right.
And when you start looking at it, we have an awful lot of the answers. I'm very optimistic
I totally agree
that we have a good idea of what's going on, and that we got to quit playing this stupid game. And that's where, like, even the MUFON group, which is the whole thing, is it's scientific. So it's like we have to measure, we have to, and you're falling into that trap that once you start trying to appease the scientific community, this which believes, and people don't realize this, that there's only 7% of people in the National Academy of Sciences, the top 2,000 scientists in the United States, who will claim any admission of any type of God. There's only 4% of them in the National Academy of Sciences who will admit to any sort of paranormal or something outside the conscious spectrum, that there's paranormal phenomena or whatever. And so they're stuck in this. This is the roadblock, is this physical worldview, is that you can't get from another planet to here because of the speed of light, that you can't go past the speed of light. And it's all these physical laws. It's Newtonian physics.
It's false programming.
Yeah. It's the old days. I mean, we're into quantum physics. We're into understanding about frequency. We're into you have to understand this spectrum, that it's not just this one thing where it's a light bulb, turn on a light bulb and it goes off. It's a very massive, and we should have learned this over the last couple 100 years, that the more you look at nature, the more complex it gets, the more magnificent it gets. And to get riveted into some little idea that there's this little thing, and this is the end of the thing, and we've discovered everything. It's like almost the height of ego and arrogance. That
it is,
and it sort of sets us off, where we fall into that pattern of believing the physical. And then this thing about separation, which I think is big, is that we preach this separation thing, that we're just independent particles, we're banging into each other. So it's rape, pillage, steal, get whatever you can. It's survival of the fittest. Whoever's got the most toys when they die wins. And we completely avoid the whole problem that David Bohm, who was one of the top quantum physicists who dealt with this problem, said, it is as if a swarm of locusts had descended upon the earth. And that until we get away from the separation idea, that we are separate and that we have to get more and more and more and more, we are going off the cliff. We are not going to survive. You have to realize that we are one, and that you have to protect the one, the environment, Gaia, the universe, that we are responsible to the one, and that unless we do, if we keep this separation thing going, all it is send your kids to school, get bigger houses than we have, get more toys than we have, and eventually David Bohm says you're going to run out of resources. It's completely mathematical. There's no question about this, and that's where he said it's like we have, and the aliens must look at it the same way. It is as if a swarm of locusts had descended upon the earth. And that's where I sort of warn people about when they talk about disclosure. They say, oh, we get disclosure, we're going to have free energy. I said, beware what you ask for. I mean, we complain about the Chinese. The Chinese got the 8% growth rate, and we say, man, they're using up all the resources. Look at how they're polluting their environment. All they need is free energy. And then you're going to have a 20% growth rate. And then you watch the things go downhill. I mean, if you suddenly can double the growth rate and how fast we're going to use up the resources with free energy, people say, well, I've got cheap cars. We can buy, we can start driving big cars again. Think about what's going on is you've got to slow this thing down. You've got to get the growth under control and get it balanced. That's what it comes down to is we are the ones that are throwing the earth out of balance. And that if it comes down to it, we go, and I'm sure the aliens have made this point to numerous people, we go, it really doesn't matter. They're going to, as Neil Young said in his famous song, they're just going to pick up people and take them to another planet, and then the planet will go back to balance. Once the human beings are gone, the planet will go back to balance. And so you get these things, and that's one of the downloads that came, which is this. When you want to talk about music, this is one of the weird stories. The Moody Blues one about the reincarnation thing is weird. The other one is Neil Young, who's a big environmentalist. He's one of the guys that's trying to stop the oil sands here in Canada. He was born actually in Winnipeg, where I was born and live, and now he lives in San Jose, California. But he wrote a song called After the Gold Rush. And when I first got into the alien music thing, Chris Bledsoe was the one that got me into it. And he said, the aliens have told me that they're influencing music to get across messages. And it was like the Dogs. It was like, yeah, okay, whatever, And I just really didn't pay any attention to it. And then I heard Colin Andrews. And then Colin Andrews told the Moody Blues story. And 4 other bands that came to him and told him the same story, that they were downloading, they were getting downloads of songs and lyrics, and the aliens were doing this and whatever. And when I heard Colin Andrews, I went, whoa. So I started checking this. And one of the songs that Chris Bledsoe gave me was Neil Young's song called After the Gold Rush. And if you play the song, you look at the song, it is the environmental alien message. It basically says we are treating the world like a gold rush. And when the gold is gone, it's going to become a ghost town. And the silver seeds are going to come and take the chosen ones and take them to another planet. That's exactly what the song says. So Neil Young was asked, and I'll tell you, first of all, I'll go through the different people that did it. So he does this song. He does it in 1968, and he was asked, what does the song mean? And he says, I have no idea what the song means. I was totally stoned when I wrote the song. And he said, each verse may mean something different depending on what I was taking. I have no idea what the song means. And then Thom Yorke does the song. And he's a big band. I mean, I'm not really into music. I'm sort of like a musical idiot. But he does the song. And he actually, at one point, plays it on Neil Young's song. He's in San Jose. And he turns out he's an abductee. He talks about the fact that he got interested in UFOs. He wrote the Subterranean Homesick Alien. And he talks about, they asked him, why did you write this alien song? And he said, well, I did because I was impressed when I was in school. I was asked to write a song or an essay about, imagine you're an alien from another world and you're here to see the world. And what do you think of the world? And the second thing, he says, I'm driving down the road, and you hear this all the time with screen images, with the owl in the middle of the road and all this sort of stuff. He says, I'm driving down the road, and I hit a bird with my car. And he said, I got out of the car to see what I'd hit, and suddenly I start thinking about alien abduction. And then he starts writing these alien songs, and so he's clearly an experiencer. He writes this song, I wish they'd swoop down on a country road late at night when I'm driving. Take me on board their beautiful ship. Show me the world as I like to see it. I'll tell all my friends they'd never believe me. They'd think I'd finally lost it. Show me the stars and the meaning of life. They'd shut me away, but I'd be all right, all right. So he takes this song that Neil Young doesn't know what it means. This got this alien message, and he suddenly goes and sings this song. And then Patti Smith, is the head of punk rock. She's the godmother of punk rock in New York, and she was famous at Saturday Night Live. She was on this third version of Saturday Night Live, the third show. She was big in the 1970s on Saturday Night Live, and she sang this song, Gloria. Now, she sings the song. She sings the thing and as well, and she talks about the fact she writes these songs about aliens in the 1975, 76. And you got to remember, this is before Travis Walton. She's writing these songs about alien abduction. And then she does an interview, and I played this when I lecture. She does this interview where she actually says she believes she's not from this planet, that she always believes she's been an alien. She was dropped here from someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to actually going to all these other musicians. And I think I name about 10 or 11 musicians who all say they came from another planet. And one of them was John Denver. John Denver said he was from the constellation Lyra. He said he imagined. In public, he said he imagined. But he wrote a song about it. And the guy who wrote the song, the lyrics for the song, said, no, John believed he was from there. He actually believed he was from there. So you got John Denver believing. And then, then I hear this story that this famous song about the gold rush. I hear that Dolly Parton was the one that asked Neil Young about what the song meant. And she and Linda Ronstadt and one other woman sang it. And I go and check, and sure enough, she wrote a song that talks about, I'm gone. I may have been abducted by an alien, but I'm gone, I'm gone. And it's like, holy cow. It's like you see these connections in these songs. It's just bizarre. And I don't know how many, I haven't even checked how many other people sang that song and whether they have this sort of thing. But I think people would be surprised at how many musicians claim to have been abducted or have these abductions. John Lennon clearly appeared to have been abducted. Everybody knows about his sighting. But when you hear the story told by May Pang, and we've had correspondence with her, and she does confirm that she realizes the weird part of the story is that when she tells the story, this thing was flying around for about 10 minutes, and John talks about it. He puts it in an album, and he also has a song about it, Strange Days. I saw a UFO in New York City, and nobody cares. And he talks about it openly on a radio talk show about the fact that he saw it and that they phoned the radio talks. He had somebody phone radio talk shows and the police and stuff like that about it. But when May Pang tells the story, she tells the story how they were both naked on this penthouse balcony up in New York City at the Dakota, and that there was a balcony down to the balcony below, and the people below them were there all the time. She said, and the strangest thing, she said, we were sitting there and we're watching this thing fly around, and John's yelling, we're yelling and screaming. Why did those people not come up? It was really weird. Those people didn't come up to see why we were yelling and screaming. And she said, the other weird thing was I looked out and everybody was gone. All the apartments that we could see, all the lights were out. And then she said, suddenly I thought, oh, it's Friday night. Everybody went to the Hamptons. And we sort of went to her and said, really? Everybody in New York went to the Hamptons? And it's that whole thing, this sort of, they call it the Oz effect. Mm-hmm. People who are abducted, people are driving down a freeway, there's piles of cars, and all of a sudden, all the cars are gone, and they get abducted. It's like they can sort of, isolate the person.
Yeah, it's like a time slip or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And May Pang talks about this, and she knows she has this Oz thing where everything sort of stopped, time stopped and stuff like that. So John, and then you got, Cat Stevens, who's now become Muslim, doesn't talk about it anymore, but clearly wrote 2 songs about being on the ship with no wheel. The whole thing that it's used the mind to fly the ship. Mm-hmm. And he writes this song. He wrote 2 songs on the freezing steel, the ship with the freezing steel. And the guy from Kiss, the lead guy from Kiss, Ace Frehley, talks about waking in the doorway, and he had these visions, and there was a crop circle, or there's a burn mark in the backyard of his thing, and David Bowie believing the aliens were following him around and trying to influence him, and he was an editor of a UFO magazine. He had 6 or 7 sightings a night in the late 1960s. Now he's very conservative, doesn't talk about UFOs anymore, but it's unbelievable when you start looking at how many guys that are musicians are claiming experiences or UFO sightings, and then you get these weird connections. Like I mentioned, Pinder from the Moody Blues is he left the Moody Blues, I think, in 74 or 75 or something. So I'm checking to see who replaced him, and the guy that replaced him was Patrick Moraz. And Patrick Moraz, I've got him talking about UFOs. The guy's absolutely fascinated with UFOs, and he has the record of the musicians for seeing UFOs. He talks about, I've got him on tape talking about seeing thousands of UFOs at one time in Brazil when they're doing a rehearsal up on a hill, and he goes out with one of his band members, and he said it was like a freeway. Red objects going through the sky like a freeway, all these UFOs. And he's the guy that replaces Mike Pinder in the Moody Blues. So what's the chances that one wacko UFO guy replaces another wacko UFO guy, and that the UFO stories wouldn't come out till 40 years later? It's just all the synchronicities.
Yeah.
It's just so weird and then you start looking at it and you're going like, this is not chance. I mean, we are being led down this path, and the aliens somebody's moving, as Colin and I always describe it. It's like chess pieces being moved around. How things that happen to me, these synchronistic events, or Colin Andrews, this event where he's never told anybody he's been abducted. He knew since 1999 that he'd been abducted, but he said, I can't tell people. I mean, it's over for me, man. I'm the electrical engineer. I'm the crop circle guy. I'm the scientist and stuff. He said, it's over for me. My career's over if I say I've been abducted. And he remembered 1957, he'd been abducted when he was regressed and stuff like that. And then he's in the shower. Have you ever heard the story? He's in the shower. He's supposed to be lecturing for X conference for Steve Bassett. And he's in the shower in Connecticut, and this is like 2009. He's in the shower, and he's sitting there relaxing in the shower, and he says, all of a sudden, this voice comes in his head, and it says, you have to go public. And I said to myself, I know. He said, they didn't have to tell me that you were abducted. They didn't have to say what happened when you were 5 years old. I knew exactly what they meant. And he said in his mind, he says, I can't do it. I just can't do it. And then the voice comes back and says, no, timing is everything. You have to come now. And then he thinks, oh, maybe I could do that. So he gets the records together, and he doesn't tell anybody that he's going to announce the fact that he's an abductee. And so he goes to Steve Bassett's thing, and he's supposed to be talking about crop circles, that the British government said they weren't involved in crop circles, and he's going to come forward with all the documents, and he's going to say, they're lying, here's the documents, I worked with them, they were involved in this sort of stuff. But he doesn't tell anybody that he's going to announce that he's been abducted. And he says he goes into the lecture hall, and he's about to speak, he's about to go up to the platform, and he says a guy walks up to him, he says the guy looks as human as anybody on earth, and the guy looks at him and through him as if he's looking through his mind, and he says to him, you know you have to do this, don't you? And Colin just shakes his head, and the guy just turned around, and he said he never saw the guy again. And Colin, he said, he just like sent shivers. He was just like, wow, this guy knew that he'd got the message. And he said, you know you have to do this, don't you? And he makes the announcement that he's an abductee. So and you see all these things, like I just realized before, Robert Salas, the whole nuclear connection. The nuclear connection is big in the UFO thing. It's one of the reasons they come here. And the book I'm about to release, I'm going to show a photo from and Ash has seen it. Ash was pretty blown away by this. I have a photo taken by a guy by the name of Ed Rogers. He was a Marine. 1945, August 1945, a couple weeks after the detonation of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. This guy is on a ship on Marines coming in to look at the damage. He's taking photographs. He's photographing everything. In the late 1990s, suddenly the photographs, they discover that there's UFOs in all these photographs. And he says, nobody's to make this public. The guy died 6 months ago. Maria Ude from Tucson had control of the photograph. She's allowed me to use this. And here you have this thing. So you got the nuclear connection. So then you look at Robert Salas, and you look at, is this chance? Robert Salas has now come forward. He's the guy that was in the silo in Malmstrom in 1967 when they shut down the 10 nuclear missiles. He's an abductee. So it was like the aliens had one of their own guys inside the silo when they shut the missiles down. And it's almost like, the whole, this thing of consciousness that if you're military, you're going to look at this. You can put your own guy inside on the other side and telepathically control this person. That it's this mind thing that's so kinetic, so critical. And then you start looking at, Whitley Strieber got 500,000 letters from abductee people. So this is a massive phenomena. And you start looking at, if Betty and Barney Hill weren't turned on until 1961, and then you had 67, 75, Travis Walton, and then the communion book, then more and more people are coming forward now and saying they're experiencers. I mean, you got to wonder how many people haven't been turned on yet, that there's, millions more people who are walking around that they just haven't turned the switch on yet.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Grant, I know you're rolling so fast, and I just love having you on. And I want to thank you so much. We're getting ready to wrap this up pretty soon here. But before we do that, I want everybody to know how they can get in touch with you, when you're going to be speaking and where, and also your upcoming book. When is that going to be out?
The book will be out sometime next year, and then we're looking at the one on inspiration, which I'm going to hope to try to get out next year. This is the one on the downloads, the inspiration, how this consciousness spectrum. The lecture I'm giving is the next one is in Laughlin, Nevada. That's for Paula Harris, and that's where the UFO Congress used to be. And this is it's being moved back there. This is where the cheap $25 a night hotel rooms are. Beautiful place along the Colorado River. And I'm lecturing on the Sunday morning, November the 16th, and I'm doing the advanced consciousness lecture. I've only got 1 hour, but I'll go through that. And I'm also lecturing in Las Vegas, Nevada. For anybody who's in Las Vegas, I'm lecturing on the 17th, on the Monday in Las Vegas. And my website is presidentialufo.com, and I will post those locations there. And I do appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's always an honor, Grant. And we still have a few more minutes here, but I want to make sure we get all that information out. And yeah, I let you do most of the talking tonight. It was fabulous. I just love listening to what you have to communicate. And you're so right about everything with the contactees and the abductees. I mean, they really, truly have a relationship with these extraterrestrials. It's it's almost like an entanglement.
Yeah. And they have to me is the important message. I mean, you can't get any closer to the phenomena than to go through them, or unless you go through someone like you, who's had an interaction with the sort of the government part of the phenomena.
Yeah.
But that's where you got to deal with these people if you want to understand what's going on, and not assume. I think basically everybody's telling the truth. Everybody's basically telling this is not the type of story you want to come out and say, I got abducted by an alien and think you're going to be famous or everybody's going to love you. You know it's going to be painful. So I think majority of people are just telling what actually happened to them and telling the truth. And they have very critical things that once you start listening to these people, it all starts making sense, especially when you put that consciousness thing in there and realize that the basis of matter is consciousness, that when you break down matter, it basically breaks down into, quantum wave potentials. There really is no matter. There is no solid material and stuff like that. And once you put things in perspective, then you start understanding how aliens can put people through walls, how they can go into the future, how they can go into the past. Everything starts to make sense, but you've got to make that move. And then I think the next move you've got to do, I don't know how you do it, is put you, me, all these other people that have got this together into a group where we start exchanging ideas so that we can learn from each other.
I agree. No, we should brainstorm for sure. I would love to do something like that. So let me know, because I have a lot of data on the artificial intelligence. I mean, that's something I'm really, really experienced in. So anytime, for sure on that one. We've got about 2 minutes left here, but I just want to make sure. And before I forget, stay tuned for, let's see, we have here, Dr. J's coming up next, or Researcher on a Mission. So make sure you all tune in for that. I do want to thank everybody here at Dark Matter Radio Network for tuning in, and I hope you appreciate Grant. I certainly do. We all love you over here, Grant. So
I appreciate it, and I appreciate Ash, your friend in
Ash. Hey, Ash
had done some work promoting it over in on Hong Kong and New Zealand and Australia and South Africa. So for those people that are listening, we realize it's not just an American phenomena, that this is going on. All these experiences are going on over there. And hope these people can contribute and link into what I hope is going to be a sort of an exchange of ideas, because I think we're pretty close to the sort of the tipping point where we can really put this thing together and basically do what we're supposed to do. I think somehow save the world or move it to the place it's supposed to be and get it away from this sort of a dog-eat-dog world where things are just spiraling down in terms of the environment and weapons and stuff like that, and understand the world is one, and that we are living for a reason, that we probably planned our lives, and that we have something to do, and we should be busy about doing what we are supposed to do, whatever that is.
Exactly. Well said, indeed. Yeah, the last thing I want to see is this technology weaponized, or any of this type of information weaponized to an extent where it just takes everybody down. Want to take it all up to the highest level. And I do like the idea of brainstorming and getting together like minds to put together more data and compare notes and all that good stuff. So because it is powerful technology. I always describe it as like the power behind what's going on here is going to make nuclear weapons look like matchsticks. So absolutely. So it's very important to get control of it. It is. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Keith. Thank you again, Grant. Have a great week, everybody. Yeah. Take care.